What? What's not good, Mindy?
The alarm's going off.
Okay, so I knew the alarm might go off. I'm gonna introduce the campaign really quick. I will introduce the speaker, and then when you come back, you can roll your remarks into wrap up. Does that sound good? Perfect. Never a dull moment at the University of Washington or in the Combined Fund Drive.
I assume this is just a test they planned, not a real.
Yes, it is a test they planned. Fire drill at RCW.
Okay.
Fun times, which is where
Glad.
UWCR is housed.
Just glad everyone is safe and it's not a.
Yes, yeah, no, the building's not on fire. We just have to go over to the Pineapple Cafe. Anyway, so hi everyone. I want to start with a land acknowledgement this morning. The UW Combined Fund Drive acknowledges that we live and work on the traditional territories of the Duwamish and Coast Salish peoples and that we occupy this land. And while we recognize that this acknowledgement does not replace authentic relationships with Indigenous communities, we hope that it honors with gratitude the land and its original inhabitants. And with that being said, welcome to this year's Combined Fund Drive Kickoff. I'm Julian Mason. I am the campaign manager for the Combined Fund Drive, and I am super excited that you're all here today. I'm so thrilled to see you. You, our campaign coordinators, really ensure that the work of the Combined Fund Drive provides the necessary resources to our nonprofit members so that they can do the critical work they do to support the health of communities locally, nationally, and internationally. You make a difference, you make a positive impact, and you spread the good works of the University of Washington around the world. And I just think that's really amazing. And with your work on the campaign this year and the collective support of the UW community, our UW employees will help create healthy nonprofits which in turn create healthy communities. I'm excited to introduce speakers today. And before I do that, I just want to let you know that our featured speaker from Doctors Without Borders will be staying after the official program ends and is here to answer any questions you might have, which is a great opportunity to learn more about the work they're doing. And since Mindy has had to evacuate the building temporarily, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So this year, we're incredibly pleased to select to be featuring Doctors Without Borders. They're well known and well respected throughout the world. And most of us have heard of Doctors Without Borders and probably had an idea about what they do, right? Doctors, war zones, working in dangerous, unstable countries. And that's part of the work they do. But they do so much more. And Doctors Without Borders is currently working in more than 70 countries on nearly 5 billion missions, serving more than 1 million people, which is pretty impressive. Like, everybody, let's give them a little hand. Let's give them a digital hand. It's amazing work. And I'm so pleased to feature one of their staff and board members, Dr. Jack Gomer. Jack Gomer, you're not a doctor. I've immediately upgraded you because you're volunteering with Doctors Without Borders. So welcome. Jack has spent over a decade working in international healthcare, joining Doctors Without Borders in 2015, having completed 3 missions in Nigeria and South Sudan. Outside of his volunteer work, Jack has experience in healthcare development in China, Ecuador, and Bolivia. He obtained his MBA from the University of Denver and is currently based out of Seattle, yay, where he works as an investor in early stage healthcare companies on behalf of nonprofit health systems, which sounds really amazing. And I am pleased to welcome Jack. Welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here. And I just want to echo the thanks for the campaign that you guys have. It really means a lot. So I'm happy to share some information about our organization and share a bit about my experience in the field, and then take any questions later on that anybody might have. So let me share my screen here with our little presentation. All right, so yes, you've got my my glorious introduction, so I'll skip past myself and talk about Doctors Without Borders? So just a quick definition, we call it Doctors Without Borders here in the US and also in some other places, but it's also called Médecins Sans Frontières. That's a French for Doctors Without Borders, and so we say MSF for short. It is a lot easier to say it that way. And thanks again for that intro. We do operate in over 70 countries around the world. We've got, at any given time, about 60,000 staff, about 450 projects active at any given moment. So we truly are a global humanitarian medical organization, and we've grown a lot. And the reason we've been able to grow and to treat the patients that we do is because of organizations like yours and people like you. So getting into what we do, we are an emergency medical organization. And so that does mean something in contrast to a lot of other organizations out there. And I'll get into a bit more about what that means, but mostly it's about who we help. And so that's going to be populations in distress. But before getting into who we help, how we help them in the context that we work in, it's really important to talk about the principles of the organization. And this is what has allowed us to operate for the time that we have and in the places that we operate. These are three of our most important principles: neutrality, impartiality, and independence. And I'll share a bit about how that helps us operate. So when we say neutrality, it just means not taking sides. So as Julian said, we do operate in a lot of conflict zones. And when you are in a conflict zone, obviously it's quite intense, but it is challenging to maintain that neutrality, because when you have a population who is targeted by another population, treating victims on both sides of the conflicts is challenging, because one organization is, maybe you could say, disinclined to allow you to help the people of the opposing side. And so that is something that's difficult to maintain, but it's really important, because long-term, helping any side of a conflict based on the medical needs is how we maintain access to patients in conflict zones. As long as each side knows that we will treat patients from both sides of the conflict, they are more inclined to allow us to access, because they know that in a month's time, things can be reversed and they may be the ones in need of medical care. So it's a challenging thing to maintain, but it is what has allowed us to operate for as long as we have. Now, the second is impartiality. And this is something that maybe we take for granted a bit here in the US, but what it means is that we treat anyone that needs medical care, regardless of who they are. So this is rooted in medical ethics, race, gender, political affiliation, religious affiliation. It doesn't matter. We treat everybody impartially. And it includes combatants. So we will not withhold care for a combatant on either side of a conflict. And again, that does create some challenges, especially you might see in a lot of MSF materials and articles or in the projects, we have a lot of no weapons stickers on our walls, our windows, our cars. And this is something that's important, because we don't allow weapons inside of our facilities. And that's a challenging thing to maintain in a war zone, as you can imagine, when you're telling the soldiers they can't bring their weapons into the facilities. But it's another important piece of what we do. And finally, and what's extremely relevant for today's conversation, is independence. So what independence means is that we have no strings, maybe you could say. So and we'll talk a bit more about this when we get into the fundraising, but the vast majority of our fundraising comes from people like you, so individuals. Yes, we do have some small corporate donations or foundation grants, but that represents an extremely small percentage of our fundraising. more than 90% come from individual donors. And that's important because when we do raise funds, sorry, we do it in the form of unrestricted funding. Now, what that means is our teams on the ground are responsible for identifying the needs of the patients that are currently being treated or we have visibility on, and we're able to respond to those needs. And so I'll talk more later about what that means in reality. But we don't take money from governments. We don't take money from international organizations like the United Nations. We don't have an agenda. We don't have a political, religious, or economic agenda. We simply take funds based on the needs of the beneficiaries on the ground. And that's another extremely important long-term principle of the organization. If we come to be viewed as representing the agenda of countries or international organizations, it creates access problems. We won't be able to go to the places that we go now because people will view us as representing the United States or France or countries that sometimes are not extremely positively viewed in the places that we work. So that is a bit about our independence. Now, this is an extremely impressive map of the countries that we have activities in. It's really amazing. So 70 more than countries at any given time in the world, we have active projects. So you can imagine that logistically, it's a very challenging organization to run, but now I'd like to share a bit about what it is that we actually do. So these are the types of emergencies that we respond to. So we've already mentioned war and conflict zones. So that represents a little more than half of the projects that we have active at any given moment. So I'll get into more about what those responses look like, but these are more the contexts that we work in. So war, conflict zones, more than half of our projects. We also respond to epidemics and pandemics. The world has received an education on that terminology over the last few years. Apart from COVID, there are many other pandemics, cholera, HIV, tuberculosis. There are other epidemics that we respond to, cholera being a very common one, for sure. We also respond to displacement. So this is refugees and internally displaced people. So just for definition, the only difference between an internally displaced person or an IDP and a refugee is that a refugee has crossed a border. Otherwise, it's the same thing. So an IDP or a refugee are fleeing conflict and persecution. And we are very active for these populations, whether they are on the roads, migrating, or whether they are temporarily displaced by conflicts and in a temporary camp or a longer term camp. This is a very common context where we work. Another type of context is called exclusion from healthcare. So what this means, in going back to two opposing sides of a conflict scenario, oftentimes when you have an historical conflict between two groups and the larger, or for whatever reason, a group is in power, they're oftentimes not motivated to provide care to using the country's resources to groups that they perceive to be at odds with them. And so this creates exclusion from healthcare, but there's other examples too: prisoners, migrants, street children. There are lots of examples of groups that are excluded from care, and MSF provides that care. Finally, environmental disasters, which we hear a lot about, but actually for MSF is among the smaller in terms of a percentage of project types of contexts that we respond to. But we do, and the reason we're able to do so is because of the speed with which we can respond. So this has a lot to do with our logistics, which we'll chat more about later, but we respond very quickly and at scale. So this is one of the most important characteristics of MSF. We can respond faster and with a larger scope of activity than pretty much any other organization in the world. And so that is useful in lots of scenarios, but certainly environmental disasters as well. So those are the contexts that we work in. But now I'll share a bit about how we actually respond. So what we do, you could think of this as the types of projects that we run. So, and this is going to be actually looks like a mobile vaccination campaign. But here we have an example of a mobile clinic, and so I'll share more about this. This is a type of project that I've been involved in as well. And so a mobile clinic is extremely common because it's a way to create access. And we do this here in the US as well. Obviously, it looks a little bit different in the context that we work in. So a mobile clinic can mean a lot of different things. It can be providing preventative care, primary care. It can be triage and transfer of patients to a hospital or a surgical facility. It can be transporting more or less equipment, lab equipment, testing, diagnostics. The whole point of a mobile clinic is basically to provide care to populations that are not easily accessed. So in the exclusion from care scenario, oftentimes it's very challenging to reach populations who live in a context like the one you're seeing on your screen now. And again, what makes MSF so special is we can generate that access through extremely creative and effective ways. Vaccination is really challenging, and in countries that we work, ministries of health, providing routine and preventative vaccinations. Here in the US, we take it for granted. We just pop into the clinic or the hospital for a course of vaccinations when you're a child or whenever we need. That's not as easy. We have an infrastructure here that allows vaccines to be kept, and we learned about cold chain challenges at the beginning of the pandemic. Cold chain in a scenario like this one is really tough because you have to maintain, I think, usually between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius, these vaccines. And so when you're traveling 2 days by boat in a river where it's 40 degrees Celsius, maintaining that cold chain is really tough. So it's an example of a mobile clinic. This is a surgical intervention. Again, a very common type of intervention or project that we perform. Surgery is one of the things that we are best at, for sure. So we are able to deploy what's called flying surgeons. And so, and I'll share more about this in my own experience, but we have what's called a gas pool. So surgeons, gynes, anesthesiologists, nurse anesthetists who are on standby to get on a plane and fly anywhere in the world and stand up a surgical intervention overnight and start knocking out surgeries 24/7. And this means that if we are in a context where all of a sudden war breaks out, civilian and combatant wounded begin to show up, we can have a full surgical team with a complete surgical kit. And that means everything needed to perform multiple surgeries within 24 hours in many different contexts. This is unfortunately something we do more often than is great, but this is an example of the speed and scale that MSF can respond. And it's one that we are very, very good at. So we also have treatment of infectious disease. This is another example. You see this a lot. Cholera outbreaks are extremely common. That is a fecal oral waterborne disease. So you can imagine in contexts where people are massively displaced, all of a sudden 30,000 people are huddled together in a place with no sanitation. This can become a problem very quickly. So again, this is something we have a lot of experience in doing, treating infectious disease. But there's more than just cholera, and it's something that we do a lot. TB, HIV, and HIV is something that we began treating somewhat recently, actually about 15 years ago. So these are just examples of the types of projects we do. We do more. So we do support activities. So in situations where a country may have a health structure that's at a minimum level, we might play a supporting role rather than a primary role, and empower local healthcare actors through our logistic and supply chain capabilities. We can do water and sanitation interventions. So this is another common one. So when people are massively displaced, water is obviously one of the most important needs immediately. That's something that we can create. We can build hospitals. We can do a lot of different things. So these are just a few examples of what we do. And oftentimes you see a lot of these things happening at the same time in the same project. So it can become very complex very quickly. And this is just to give you a sense of scale, some of the numbers behind what we do. This is 2021. We performed over 2.5 million outpatient consultations, treated 100,000 children in hospitals, performed over 2,000 safe abortions. We have a truly global and very large scale medical presence and activity. We performed over 17,000 surgeries, had over 130,000 emergency consultations. So this is just to give you a sense of the reach and the scale of the organization. And I want to share a bit about who we are. So who are the people performing these activities and delivering care to these populations? Who are the aid workers? So of course, when you think of MSF, or Doctors Without Borders, you think of doctors, and we do have lots of doctors, as well as other providers, nurses, surgeons, anesthesiologists, nurse anesthetists. These are the folks on the front lines delivering care, for sure. But we also have a lot of other folks. Being able to deliver the whole activity is what makes MSF unique. A lot of organizations will have one component of an intervention. Maybe they have a doctor, maybe they have a logistician. We have everybody, which means that we can holistically show up and stand up a project independently, completely from scratch, carry out that project. And that requires not only providers, but a huge number of support staff to execute these projects. We have lab techs, mental health specialists, epidemiologists, pharmacists. We also have logistic and administrative staff. All of these things require a tremendous amount of expertise and support. And again, what makes MSF unique is that we can show up and do everything. So these are just some examples: logisticians, water and sanitation experts, construction logisticians, electricians. We have flying electricians who move from project to project and ensure that, for example, we were not going to run out of oxygen, that our electrical setup is not going to collapse overnight, which, believe me, is a real risk. We also have finance and human resource professionals. We employ a huge number of people, and we're beholden to best-in-class systems, not just for our medical activities, but for our administrative activities as well. So having these professionals is really important. Okay, so what I really want to emphasize, though, about our aid workers is the national staff that we hire and employ. So like we said, we have about just over 60,000 employees at any given time. The vast majority are locally hired staff. So that means that we are employing, as of 2021, more than 37,000 national staff in the context that we work. This means that we are a massive employer of people in conflict zones. Our sincere hope and part of our large organizational efforts are around empowering locally hired staff to have a huge voice. And our goal is, through enough experience, to train locally hired staff to move to become an international staff. So that means they get experience and they can move from being a locally hired staff to a project in another country and become international staff. Headquarters staff are at our operational headquarters. These are in West Africa and Europe for the most part. But again, international staff and headquarters staff are the minority of people. I was considered an international staff, to give you an example. And now a bit about our fundraising. So I mentioned before how important the type of fundraising is to maintaining our independence. And maintaining our independence is important, ability to respond. So a lot of folks might be familiar with how other NGOs work. So maybe they're in a country, maybe they identify a need or a population, and then they start what's called a grant writing process. So they will see a population that's displaced and have needs. They write a grant to stand up an activity to service those needs. It takes a long time to write the grant. Approval processes, they submit the grant. Hopefully the grant is approved. Eventually the money is earmarked for the specific activities detailed in the grant. The money goes back to the actor on the ground. Oftentimes, by the time that cycle is complete, the needs have completely changed, or the population may have even moved, which means the organization is no longer able to execute on what the needs originally were. MSF is different because we do not perform that iterative process of grant writing and approval. Because our funds are unrestricted and they're used to service the needs that we identify in real time on the ground, it means that we respond immediately. We would not be able to have a surgical team ready to deploy to a conflict zone within 24 hours with an enormous surgical kit if we were not raising money from individuals in this unrestricted manner. So this is what allows us to do what we do. And this principle is reflected in our fundraising work. As you can see, 94% of revenue that was generated in the United States was by individuals. So foundations and corporations made up 6% of total fundraising, individuals the rest. So this is an example of our principle of independence as it exists on our fundraising side. And how that money is spent, 85% go to programs. So our management costs are 1%. Our fundraising costs are 14%. And the other 85% go directly to the programs on the ground. Charity Navigator, of course, always ranks MSF as the highest, if not one of the highest NGOs in terms of efficiency of the dollars that are raised and spent. We're very proud of that. I'm on the board, but I'm a volunteer. I don't get paid for this at all. This is what MSF is it attracts people who are willing to do what we do for low pay or no pay in many cases. So it's part of the ethos of what we are, and it allows us to operate so efficiently. Okay, so I wanted to share a bit about my own experience. I think folks sometimes find it interesting to hear a real project, a real example of what we do. So in my first project, 2016, I went to a place called South Sudan, which is a new country. I think 2004 is when South Sudan was created. They left from Sudan after a very long, very bloody conflict. Started their own country. The capital is Juba. You can see where it is, that little map there. I think I stole this from Britannica. Don't tell them I did that, please. And the project I was in a place called Old Fangak, which is in the northern part of South Sudan, near the border with Sudan. And it is something called the Suit. The Suit is the largest expanse of swamp in the world. This town, this project is only accessible by boat and by plane. And then plane only in the dry season. The wet season, you have to get there by helicopter because the landing strip is dirt, and so it becomes muddy and you can't land a fixed wing aircraft there. This is just a context photo. This is taken from the article that MSF published about this project. So this is a very wet project. Standing water is everywhere. It's on the tributary of the Nile. It's called the White Nile. So you take a boat up and you're on the Nile there. This was an exclusion from healthcare and an arms conflict project. So the context here is You have what I said before, a minority group called the New Air, who were in this area, and the majority group were in power in the country. And so they were not inclined to extend public health services to this area because every summer in the dry season, they picked up the conflicts and fought each other again. So during the wet season, people walk oftentimes a week through the swamp to access this hospital. It's the only healthcare facility in the area, which obviously creates issues with infection and things like that. During the dry season, the conflict line it ranges, but it's pretty close to where this project is. So the war picks back up again in the summer, people fight each other, and this project becomes a surgical project for war wounded. There is a couple photos here. This is the boat there. What we did was provide mobile clinic. So it's a river-based project, which means we have boats, and we provide different days of the week. We would go different areas of the river, create access to primary care, preventative care, and then we would transfer critically ill patients back to our hospital. So we did that every day, long days on the river, and that's an example of a surgical patient down there. So this is what happened. The conflict broke out. We started receiving war wounded. It's called a mass casualty event. So boatloads of soldiers who are wounded, typically bullet, began showing up. We flew in a surgical team. They were there, and we stood up a surgical facility within 2 days and treated a lot of war wounded there. That was my first project. The second was in Nigeria, so West Africa. I was in a place called Borno State in northeast Nigeria. This was back in 2017. During that time, there was a very large, significant conflict with a group called Boko Haram. They are an Islamic militant group. So the Nigerian government and Boko Haram had been in a long conflict, and the primary group that suffers in that conflict is the civilian population. So this is an arms conflict and mass displacement project. Exactly what I mentioned before is what happened here. In the region, conflict would flare up periodically. And when that happens, when the front line gets close to your village, you and 30,000 other people pick up and leave, and you travel several days by foot through the bush, seeking safety, and creating 30,000 IDPs overnight means a lot. So when you have a small village, small town that shows up to a place with nothing, no food, no water, nothing, it creates a tremendous amount of need. And this happens every month. Huge populations of people would be displaced. They would pick up and leave to avoid being killed. And our team was a regional emergency response team. And so we would track the military activity, identify patients or populations who were displaced, and travel to where they were, do what's called an assessment of needs, identify what the needs are, whether it's water, whether it's vaccination, surgery, and then we would arrange and stand up those services for those populations. This is just a photo of why people are at such risk. This is the after effects of a bombing of an IDP camp. So in a conflict, the reason that you run is because you're not safe, and civilians are indiscriminately killed very, very frequently, and they were at that time. And so this is really what we were doing, is responding to the victims of this conflict. And this is an article that we published on our website, but also advocated about through our communications platform, about what the Nigerian military did while we were there. So they bombed a camp, either by mistake or because they suspected that militants were amongst the population. So this is a pretty common one. And it's true sometimes that the militants would move into the camp and then sort of for different reasons. And so you're not safe there. They bombed the camp, killing 90, and we spoke out. So we called attention to it and talked a lot about it. So the reason I'm bringing this up is because of our additional principle, which I didn't mention before, but it's one of the most defining characteristics of our organization. So in French, it's called témoignage. In English, it means bearing witness or speaking out. So in the context that we work, we witness atrocities very frequently. And as distinct from other international aid organizations, we will speak out in the press to call attention to atrocities. In fact, MSF was founded by doctors and journalists jointly with the principle of témoignage from the very beginning. And the reason this is significant and the reason that I bring it up is because speaking out in these contexts presents a risk. When you are providing emergency medical care to a population and then speak out about atrocities committed to that population by another group, if the group committing the atrocities is in control, they may no longer grant you access to that population to provide medical care. So there's a risk for speaking out. And so we have decided that the long-term and global benefit of calling attention to atrocities is worth the risk of potentially losing access to populations that we're speaking out about. It's an easy thing to say. It's really hard to do this and make this decision in the fields, but it's one that is core to our organization and really defines who we are. And so my time is up. I will be around for questions afterwards. Thank you all again for your donations, for your awareness, for your support for MSF.
Wow. Wow, wow, wow. That was so amazing. Thank you, Jack. I want to introduce our next speaker, who was meant to be our first speaker, the fabulous Mindy Kornberg. You know, I wrote these remarks, and when I said I'm pleased to introduce one of our most stalwart supporters, I wasn't kidding. Mindy came into our office this morning and did a little cheer for the staff, and just came down with such positive energy and engagement and excitement that we're really so fortunate to have such strong support on that level. So for those of you who don't know the fabulous Mindy Cordberg, she is she's our Vice President of Human Resources, and she's been the executive sponsor of the campaign for 16 years, which, yay, like that is amazing history and such steadfast support, and it makes a difference. And truly her support, her leadership, her generosity, her excitement are all such great examples of the compassion and action that make this campaign and this program a success. So I would like to welcome back Mindy Kornberg now that the building is not being alarmed for a fire.
Yeah, it was a test, only a test, but it was certainly surprising to me. Thanks, Jolynn, and a big shout out to not only Jolynn, but her entire team, Dean, Derek, Candy, and Travis. They are just remarkable. I went down this morning. They have an incredible campaign planned for everyone, and their enthusiasm is fabulous. I've seen them around the building, and we've chatted, and they are just such a strong and incredible team. I want to share a little bit about myself that I may not have ever shared with some of you, probably most of you, about why I am so passionate about CFD. You know, when many years ago, and it's becoming many more as I grow older, I think it was after law school, I was trying to figure out what my purpose in life was going to be. And I'm sure it's one that we, or many of you have struggled with. Why was I put here? What am I going to do? How can I make a difference? And I realized that I wasn't a Joan of Salk. I wasn't going to invent any type of vaccines. I wasn't an Albert Einstein. Albert Einstein. And at that time, I don't know if there was a Bill Gates, but I knew I wasn't going to be anybody of that sort. I wasn't going to have that type of impact. And so it was at that time that I really thought about, well, but what could I do? And I realized that what I could do as an individual was going forward, making a difference or trying to make a difference to at least one person every day. And that is how I've lived my life. To me, and let me say thank you, Jack. That was an incredible, just an incredible presentation. Thank you for all you've done. Thank you for all Doctors Without Borders. But to me, the three most important things are, I believe that everybody should have a roof over their head. I believe that people shouldn't suffer from food insecurity. And I believe that people should have medical care. Those are the three basic needs that I feel so passionate about. And so in the face of this new and all of these challenges, you, our coordinators, are able through CFD to help us make a real difference. Inviting our colleagues to give is inviting them to be a part of the change that we all want to see in the world. And I know that because you wouldn't be doing this. Making a better, more caring, more equitable place. I truly believe that one person at a time, through the kindness of playing it forward, will and can make a difference in this world. And we've seen that through Doctors Without Borders, and we've seen it at so many other levels. To all of our returning coordinators, good to see you again, even though I see a lot of black boxes. You know, I would love to be seeing you all in person. I miss our, no, you don't have to turn on your box. I miss seeing you. I miss the personal contact, but you know, this is kind of what we have right now. Your continued involvement in the campaign, again, highlights how staff can contribute to UW's mission to make this a better place in the world. New coordinators, welcome, welcome, welcome. This is going to be a great campaign. It is really a lot of fun. And I must tell you, it makes me feel great in my heart. It really does. And so I hope that you enjoy it as much as I have enjoyed it over the last 16 years. And I think we have coordinators even more than I have been here, but I really hope that you will enjoy it. You will enjoy sharing the words. You will enjoy helping people make a difference. I think that Doctors Without Borders feeds into, I have to tell you, my passion. So this is just terrific. With that, I will turn it over, I think, to Jolynn.
We're going to turn it over to Anne.
I'm going to turn it over to Anne, who may have been a coordinator longer than I've been the 16 years. Is that right? Yeah, I thought so. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. And thank you for everything that you do and you've done. And let's go raise a ton of money to make the world a better place.
Thank you so much, Mindy, for those inspirational words. And I echo about how important it is to be a coordinator. And I've been involved with this program over 20 years. So I started off as a coordinator. I also led our department, all of finance and facilities back then. We had teams and we did events, and I've stayed involved with it because it's just such an important part of doing good for the community. So my name is Ann Sarna, forgot to introduce myself, and I work in the UW Treasury Office, but I'm also very proud to be the volunteer chair again this year for the UW Combined Fund Drive. And I just want to say, Jack, this was one of the best presentations we have ever had. And besides your mission, you talking about your funding, your, how your philosophy, where the money goes, how you get the money. I mean, all that was super interesting and just supports how vital this organization is about your neutrality. And I was really impressed because I had no idea about the bearing witness part of your mission. And I just thought that was so inspirational. And we just want to thank you and Doctors Without Borders for all the amazing work you're doing. And we're super excited to have this organization as our featured charity. We, having so many hospitals under the University of Washington and a lot of our mission is connected with what you're doing. I think it's such a perfect alignment with the University of Washington. And I think it's going to be very exciting for us to promote Doctors Without Borders. I know you have two names. And so again, I mentioned in the comments earlier that we get a copy of this presentation because I think a number of us would like to share this presentation with our departments. I think it will help bring attention. We've all heard Doctors Without Borders, but I don't think we understood the depth and the breadth of what you're doing. So again, thank you so much. And I also, again, I want to thank Mindy for all the work she's doing and for all of you who are joining us today. We're so looking forward to this fall campaign. And again, working with Doctors Without Borders and as well as all the other nonprofits that we'll be promoting that we're excited about. We've got a lot of great opportunities to engage that I want to share with you. So I've got a few different things and don't worry, these are going to be promoted. I'll mention them, but you'll be getting emails and they'll be on the website if you don't remember everything that I'm talking about. So the first event we have is the Fall Nonprofit Expo. We're bringing that again back and it's going to be virtual. And the date of the Nonprofit Expo is next week on October 12th. Nonprofits will be manning their digital booths from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. So you can go tell your colleagues about it at work, especially if you're a coordinator, mention this in your staff meetings that this is an opportunity to learn about various charities that are part of the Combined Fund Drive. And if you can't make that 11 to 1 spot, the digital expo will be up. You won't be able to necessarily talk to people from the charities. You can see a lot of materials. And I think that'll be very interesting to have that available, even if you can't make it. The next events I want to talk about are called Lunch and Learns. That's when during lunchtime, we bring a charity in to talk about what they're doing. And it's a really good chance because you get to get more one-on-one experiences with the person who's speaking. It's usually a smaller group than this. And so it's really a great way to learn. And our first Lunch and Learn is on October 19th. And we're going to have our own Karen Hester from the University of Washington who's going to be there. And she's going to talk more about the work of Doctors Without Borders. And there's a whole bunch of other ones coming up. And you just need to go to the UWCFD website to see the other events regarding Lunch and Learn, who the other speakers are. So I'm hoping that many of you will take advantage of this and tell your departments, because it's a great way to spend lunch to learn about these organizations. Another popular program that we have is our $5 Starbucks coffee card. Yay, I see Jolyn clapping. So this is a program we've had for a few years now, and the credit union, WSECU, they've been very, very generous in providing these coffee cards for us. So there are 3 ways you can get a coffee card. Number one, you go to the website and give to a new charity, $5. So pledge to a new charity. Number 2, look at the charities you've already given to and increase one of your gifts by $5 or more. And lastly, you can also use your volunteer hours to qualify for a coffee card. So if you're volunteering, and a lot of us do that, you can go on to my UWCFD and put in your volunteer hour, and you'll also get qualified for a coffee card. So you could do 1 or all 3, but you only get 1 coffee card. So, I mean, even though it's a wonderful way to promote this, it's lovely to get a cup of coffee too. So lastly, on the events is Coordinator Connections. And this is happening on October 27th. And what this is, it's a networking event for coordinators and the campaign assistants to get together. So especially if you're a new coordinator, this might be your campaign coordinator, but maybe some of the other campaign coordinators as well as the campaign assistants from your area and from other areas, because they can give you ideas and troubleshoot and give you some inspiration. You'll get probably an email about that as well. And lastly, those are the events. I just want everyone to acknowledge and give a round of applause to our amazing events committee members and the campaign assistants today who helped put together this event, make it possible. Thank you, everyone. And we have a few minutes left for a very important part. I'm going to bring up JoLynn because she has some door prizes.
Yeah, y'all know I loves me some door prizes. They are one of my very favorite things, like smiling and giving. And thank you, Anne and Mindy and Jack and everybody. This so excited. Yeah, so door prizes, as you know, I love them. You get something just for showing up in life, and that so rarely happens. So we're going to start, and I'm going to be joined by our amazing workplace giving specialist, the amazing Mari Litzenberger. And Mari, let's find out who is the winner of this first amazing Doctors Without Borders Super Swag gift pack. You get a bag, you get a t-shirt. We have many sizes, so if you're not extra small, don't worry. I have your size in my office. And this beautiful Liberty water bottle. These are actually made right here in Washington, and they're a great story. So I actually, even if you don't win, I encourage you to check out the Liberty water bottle brand. It's amazing. Mari, who is going home with that amazing prize?
Yes, the winner of our first door prize is Seaham Edenfield.
Nice, congratulations. Yay. All right, next up, it's Gift Card Central, friends. We would like to take you out to lunch and lunch with a $25 gift card at the Ram. Mari, who's going to be taking me or the person of their choice that's not me to lunch at the Ram?
Well, maybe it should be me since I get to announce that Philip Buff is the winner of our gift card.
Yeah, congratulations, Philip. Oh my gosh, I love it. And next, as I think everyone knows, I run almost entirely on caffeine and chocolate, and I like to support the addiction of others with the coffee. And so I have a $25 Starbucks gift card for...
You have that for Susan Williams.
Susan, congratulations. Yeah, enjoy that. And then last but certainly not least, I am very excited. I'm actually not excited to give this one away because I love sweets, as I mentioned earlier, and somebody is going to take home a $30 gift card from Trophy Cupcakes, and I wonder who that might be, Mari.
That winner is Lily Kimura.
Welcome, yay, Lily. I know that you're a new coordinator this year, so that is even more exciting. For folks who won door prizes, I will contact you after the event and get those out to you. And for all of you, thank you so much for coming to the kickoff. For new coordinators, whether you volunteered or were voluntold, thank you for coming today. And the work you're about to do. For returning coordinators, welcome back. I love seeing your faces. This is my favorite time of year, when we get to start this good work that we do together. I am so excited to share Doctors Without Borders and more of their mission and their work with the rest of campus. I hope this inspired you and you're excited to share too. The official program is almost over, but if you don't mind turning on your cameras for just 1 minute, we'd love to take a picture to have to commemorate this event. And Derek, I'm putting you in charge of that, so you'll have to tell us when you're taking the picture. I mean, I'm going to close my eyes in it anyway, so it doesn't matter, but let us know.
All right. I still see a couple.
That's okay.
Okay. Give me 1 second.
All right.
I am 3, 2, 1. And then give me a couple more because I have to go
Sure.
through the screens and get everybody. But all right, 3, 2, 1.
All right,
I won't-
everybody make a funny face that has their camera on.
Got it.
Love it. That's probably going to be the one we use. Because then we all kind of look silly. Anyway, thank you so much. Let's get out there and encourage our colleagues to do good and feel good this fall and make the world a better place. For folks who want to stay around and chat with Jack, please feel free to do so. For those of you who need to go, I absolutely understand. And Ellen and Dean, I have your questions written down, and we can go ahead and get started. All right, so Jack, bye, Bev. Dean wanted to know, how do you work with the Red Cross in your missions?
Gotcha. Yes, I saw that question. It's a very good one. So the Red Cross has two entities to it. So there's the ICRC and then there's the Red Cross. So ICRC is International Committee of the Red Cross and Red Crescent. That is an organization that was built up to treat enemy combatants originally. It's been around for a long time, but we also have the Federation of the Red Cross, that's the international governance group over a ton of national Red Crosses. So we have one in the US. There's a Red Cross in every country. And so the Red Cross here in the US actually does a lot. They respond to floods and things like that. And Red Crosses in countries where MSF works also does that. So there's sort of two parts to the Red Cross. An example of how we work with the ICRC is so in that example of the river projects where the war broke out and we were treating war wounded with mass casualty events, the ICRC was actually the ones on the front line running the boats. So when enemy combatants were shot and wounded, ICRC ran the boats. So they put the war wounded on the boats and they drove them downriver to our hospital. And then they transferred they're a little different. Like for them, you're allowed to have weapons and for us you're not. And so they would transfer the patients to us at that point. They also do some other things. So they can run medical evacuations. So sometimes in that same project, our hospital would have a patient when we didn't have a surgical team during the wet season that needed a surgical intervention. We would get the patient in the hospital, call the ICRC. They had a medical evac chopper. They would bring the chopper inland. We would transfer the patient to the chopper and they would transport them to the capital to a facility there. So, but that's just one example. It depends a lot. It depends on the context, but we have a really great relationship with the ICRC. With the National Red Cross bodies, I'm not as familiar with how we work with them. I've never worked with the National Red Cross chapters, so I can't speak to that as much.
I think that I think the National Red Cross chapters are more focused on disaster relief in the US. So we also had another great question from Ellen. She asked if you could please describe a couple of challenges related to MSF's water sanitation work, from the local governments to the conditions on site. And then 2, if you could please talk about the various types of transportation modes used for each project/site. What was one challenge transportation-wise that sticks out to you?
Sure. Okay, so water and sanitation is okay, so water and sanitation is really hard. So challenges related to water and sanitation, we call it WATSAN. Usually it is Honestly, I think it's simply the existence of water. So getting potable water to populations is usually what the challenge is. So what we often do is we'll start on a spectrum of response. And so when a population is displaced, usually we start with water trucking. So that means that we'll pay for trucks to fill up water and then convoy to the population. We provide what are called jerry cans. They're 20-liter containers. So we give them to the population, they fill it up, and they use it for a period of time. So that's like the first level. Getting those trucks in there, access is really challenging. So the vehicles themselves. After that, we'll oftentimes drill what are called boreholes. These are just wells. So we will fly in a specialist. They will do an assessment. If it's going to be a longer term displacement, for example, we'll drill a well, and then we'll install the pump so that there can be a source of fresh water that's not a bunch of trucks coming back and forth. That's another type of intervention we do. Drilling a borehole in a war zone is extremely challenging. It's really hard for a lot of reasons, logistics, getting things in and out. That's another type. And then after, if there is a water source, something else that we might do is construct a longer term system of water distribution. So this can be tanks. So we'll connect the well to a large tank and then connect a distribution system to different access points around the area that the displaced people are living. So the whole point is just to generally improve, and that's just the water provision. The sanitation side is, that's a nightmare. So we will, and again, go on a spectrum of emergency. Where it'll start is we'll dig emergency latrines. So that's just what it sounds like. They're one-off latrines that we bury afterwards. It's not obviously amazing from a environmental standpoint, but it is what it is. So, and then we move into more long-term and sustainable options after that. We might do called slab latrines, which is where we'll lay concrete and then build the tanks underneath the latrines. The way that helps is that they're drainable. So once they fill up, you can drain them versus a one-off emergency latrine where you bury it afterwards. So that's and again, logistics are usually the challenge, and that getting the concrete in, getting the construction expertise in, that's pretty tough to do in these contexts. So that's some of the examples of WATSAN stuff that we do in local governments. To the conditions on site. Yeah, conditions on site. A lot of times it depends on the type of earth we're working with. So there's different soils in different areas and different construction techniques to do these things. So that can be a big challenge. They require different materials and different ways of building these things. Local governments, usually we have a challenging but positive and working relationship with local governments. So it's not often a huge barrier. So types of transportation modes used for each project site. What was one challenge transportation wise that sticks out for you? So our most common transportation is going to be our Land Cruisers. So we have those classic white Land Cruisers with the MSF logos on the side, the no weapon stickers on the back. That's how we get around for most things. But part of our sort of ethos is access. And so we will create some extraordinarily creative modes of transportation, anything from boats and we operate in a lot of places that have a challenging wet season. So it gets really muddy. And so you just can't even get a Land Cruiser through the space. So in Papua New Guinea, we've had a drone project for a long time where we deliver medicines to mobile sort of clinics that are in very remote areas. We'll drone in medications to those spots and just drop, and then there's a little parachute, and then the medicines land at the clinic. That's a transportation mode. We've had everything from, like, we sometimes put they're like these triangular tank treads on the bottom of Land Cruisers rather than tires, so we can get through the mud and the water to get up into areas that are challenging to access. So there's a lot of different types. We sometimes, depending on the size of the intervention, we'll have our own pilots, our own planes. So really it depends on the context, and it depends on the scale of the intervention. The bigger we get, the more it makes sense to manage our own logistics and supply chain, which means managing our own flights.
Yeah.
So it can get yeah, it'll depend a lot. What sticks out to me, my favorite thing is actually we oftentimes piggyback on so in a country where we work, what the UN often does is set up kind of an aid infrastructure through which other agencies can operate. So the UN will do things like run a flight service, like they'll take over the flight service for the whole country. So that means that we have UN planes and choppers that agencies like ICRC and MSF will use. And my favorite thing is always the pilots. These guys are totally nuts. They're usually Aussies or Eastern Europeans who are comfortable flying helicopters through war zones. And so you can imagine the type of character that is. Those are my favorite people for sure.
Yeah, I have met a couple of those folks, and if you ever have a chance, buy them a drink and get them to tell you stories, because you
Good luck
will
stopping
be,
at one drink.
yeah, I was gonna say one drink for you. Like that's where you should stop. Don't try to keep up. You will die. Sorry, personal story. Okay, so Jack, you said that HIV treatment began about 15 years ago, but not when the AIDS crisis began. Do you know why?
Yeah, so this is a really interesting part of our history. So we are an emergency medical organization. And so our goal is to respond to an emergency, and when things stabilize, however you define that, that's a tricky thing, but when things stabilize, to hand over, to either close or to hand over operations to a local actor. And that's easier said than done. We sort of shoot ourselves in the foot because we respond in a massive way, and nobody can do what we do. And so we can't hand over our operations as they are to anybody else. So we usually have to scale down, and then hand over. That takes a long time. But in our core, we're an emergency medical humanitarian organization. And so originally, we did not provide treatments to HIV/AIDS patients because that's not something you can acutely treat.
Right.
That requires a pill a day for life, right? And so if there's anybody medical on the call, a lot of medical ethics revolve around we tend not to screen for things that we can't treat, and we don't start courses of treatment that we're going to abandon immediately afterwards. So there's a whole medical ethics conversation there. We had it for a long time. But eventually we started seeing so many HIV/AIDS patients in our projects. And so the debate was whether we should be treating them if we're just going to leave. So how do you start someone on a lifetime treatment and then just leave? So it was a really challenging debate, but eventually we call it the movement, the international movement, made the decision and mandated that HIV/AIDS patients would be treated in our project. So we didn't initially because we didn't feel that HIV/AIDS qualified as an acute medical emergency, and so we didn't feel it was within scope for our organization. That changed, and now we do.
That's amazing. I love that you were able to share that thought process and how your organization, especially an organization of the size of MSF, was able to evolve and adapt. And then it looks like we have one more question from Brooke. She is curious about if the medical staff are volunteers or are they paid?
Yeah, so all staff are paid, medical and non-medical. Not a lot, but we are paid. So one of the other principles that I didn't mention is called volunteerism. And it basically means that people who work for the organization are willing to take what compensation we are able to provide and do not expect increased compensation for operating in areas of conflict. What that means is that we pay a lot less than many other organizations because we believe that more of the money should be going to the projects, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And so it's great because we have a great ratio of money that goes to the programs, into the medical interventions. So yeah, which is always funny, because it means that surgeons, like, they, yes, we pay them, but oftentimes they just refuse to take the money and just take $1 per year, and then they just donate the rest. So we are paid. It is low based on the principle of volunteerism. But the other interesting thing is that in a lot of international aid agencies, if you go to a conflict zone, they pay you more money. So you get, like, for the UN, for example, you get a post adjustment, it's called.
Yep.
So you get increased because you're operating in risk zones. We don't do that. You just get paid the same amount no matter where.
Because it
No
sounds like you're
matter where
kind
you
of
go.
always operating in a risk zone.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's one of the principles, is low pay and no additional pay based on your context. So that those fall under the principle of volunteerism.
So I have a question for you. I accidentally doctored you earlier. You're not a doctor. Can you tell us a little bit about what you did with Doctors Without Borders?
Yeah, so I changed positions midway through. So I finished as what's called a project coordinator, but I started as an administrator. So I was running the finances and the HR of 2 projects. Then I switched over to being what's called a project coordinator. That means that you're sort of overall responsible for the projects, and then your day-to-day is managing operations and security. So that means you need to coordinate with sources of information, understand the security context, and make decisions about whether to operate in the context, which is super tough. And that's how I finished. Those are my 2. So I'm non-medical, but that happens a lot. People are like, "Oh, you're a doctor, right?" I'm like, "No, I'm not a doctor."
So how did you, like, what prompted you, I guess, to get involved? Did somebody say, like, "Hey, Jack, you're a super awesome dude. Do you want to, like, work for almost no pay in a conflict zone where you might die?" And you were like, "That sounds really awesome," or like, what prompted you to take that step?
For me, I was working in China. I was working at a hospital in China, and I started reading about, this is in 2014. I started reading about the Ebola response that MSF was doing in West Africa. And I don't know what it was. Like, I just started reading about this, and I just couldn't stop. Like, I couldn't stop reading about the context, the interventions, and the work that MSF was doing. And it's just like something clicked on for me, and I was like, I need to work for these guys. And so I quit my job, and so first I applied to work with them. They said no. I said, you know what, why? And they said, you need more experience in like bush contexts where we actually work. Like, so I had international healthcare experience, but not I was in Beijing, right? So I quit my job, and then I traveled and volunteered for about a year, working in South America in like a swamp, and then in Quito, Ecuador, doing volunteering for underserved indigenous groups, doing healthcare access, promotion, and awareness. And so then I did that for a year, and then I came back to MSF, and I was like, "How do you like me now?"
I hope you said that to them. That would be hilarious.
Yeah, and they were like, "All right, fine, you can work for us." So, and then that's how I started.
Well, thank you so much. Does anybody else have any questions for Jack?
Thanks a lot, everybody.
Oh my gosh, this was so fun and informative and interesting. And yeah, you see all the little applause hands. I'm giving you actual thank you. I am so excited to share this presentation with the folks who couldn't be here today. And I know that it's going to get shared beyond that. Thank you for the work that you did for MSF and the work that you're doing now to make sure that people are living a better, more equitable, healthier life. I think we all appreciate that.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.